We're just going to dive right in. Dr. Thomas P. Seager, welcome to the Optimal Performance Podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here, Sean. Thanks for having me.
Do you ever get sick of talking about cold plunging?
No, cold plunging keeps me from getting sick.
Wouldn't you like to be invited to a podcast to talk about like college football or mathematics or anything else?
Sean, none of those topics interest me anywhere near as much as cold plunge. But you bring up you remind me of an interesting point. In science, you're supposed to publish it one time and one time only. It goes in the library, and that's like the permanent record, and everybody can find it. But I found that in social media, if you don't say the same thing over and over and over again, you miss a lot of people. So I don't get tired of talking about cold plunge or talking to people like you because I always get feedback from new listeners and new readers, and they like, oh, I didn't know. And they're encouraging me to talk about it more.
Awesome. Cool. Well, we're gonna probably hit a bunch of topics in details that you have covered ad nauseum, but I'm also gonna dive down, kind of narrow in a couple of topics and a couple of areas, and hopefully ask you some questions you've never been asked before. Let's maybe I want to start because my listeners are familiar with cold therapy, cold exposure, deliberate cold exposure. Uh, I've done a number of podcasts on it. I'm a huge fan of it myself. So where I want to start is there an optimal protocol for the greatest benefit to the largest amount of people?
What a great question. No. Um, let's think about weight training. Is there an optimal weight and an optimal number of reps that everyone should use to get the best possible benefit for it doesn't make any sense, Sean. Everybody's body is different. Everybody is trained to a different extent. And so what might be good for you for what you're working on could be totally different for me. We're at different states, at different ages. We have different goals. There is no optimal. Now, Huberman's got a book out called Protocols. And I think that he's made some really sound suggestions, but you can't take Huberman's cold plunge protocol and say, well, that must be optimal for me. It depends upon where you're starting. What I say is if you're just getting going and you're not really cold acclimated, make sure the water is cold enough to gasp. So you're going to get in and you're going to feel that, involuntary inhale, and then go long enough to shiver. And that might just be 4 or 5 minutes at 50 degrees. The Morosco makes ice. It's super cold. The chunks floating around in there. But if you're just getting started, cold enough to gasp, long enough to shiver. As you become acclimated, then you're not going to shiver as much. Your brown fat is taking over. It's doing the non-shivering thermogenesis. Then you keep dropping the temperature to make sure you can still feel a little bit of that gasp, a little bit of that fear. And you just go 2 to 4 minutes. I go very cold and pretty short.
That is such an awesome way to start. I think I remember, yeah, specifically Huberman referencing like 11, was it 11 minutes a week, um, which is great. So you're a little cold in the shower, 90 seconds at a time. And I had the sense, I just love that answer because that is an interoceptive way to really approach the cold. Like, yeah, I am gasping and I am shivering, and maybe I am like that for the first 3 months. Maybe it's every day, maybe it's 4 days a week. And I have found exactly that. I don't shiver anymore. I haven't for a long time. And I keep thinking to myself, like, man, do I have to get this thing down to 36, and do I have to stay in for 12 minutes to try to get that shiver? So it's actually reassuring to hear you say like it won't happen anymore. Maybe if you could break down that brown fat explanation for why when you are cold acclimated, why that doesn't happen.
Let's talk about the 11 minutes a week, because that comes from Susanna Soberg's research at the University of Copenhagen. She took PET scans. So this is positron emission tomography, which is still the best way to look for brown fat inside the human body. It wasn't developed for that. It was developed for cancer detection. And so this goes back to like the 80s. They have you drink a radioactive tracer of glucose. And then, that spreads through your body, gets into your bloodstream pretty quick. And then tumor cells, which will prefer glucose as their metabolic substrate, they concentrate this radioactive glucose, and it's not enough to kill the tumor or anything. It's just enough to show up on the positron on the PET scan. Well, these scientists in Sweden, this is about 2007, they were looking at all these PET scans and they said, we think that there's brown fat showing up. And the medical doctor said, oh, that's impossible. There's no such thing as brown fat in adult human beings. And the Swedish scientists were like, no, no, no. There's a few scans in here. They're very symmetrical deposits, and it's right where we would expect to see it. We think that's brown fat. So someone at the Sloan Kettering Institute went and looked at 10,000 of their PET scans that they had in their archives. And they said, well, holy crap, about 5% of the people that they've scanned for cancer have brown fat. Now, that might not be representative of the whole, population, but it also means that 95% of the people didn't have any detectable brown fat at all. And these instruments, they use a lot of power. They generate a lot of heat. You got to keep the instrument room cool enough for the instrument to operate. So some of the people go in there in a hospital gown, and you know how flimsy those things, and they're feeling a little bit of it activates their brown fat, boom, it shows up. And it changed medical science's understanding of the adult physiology. And this is all just in the last 15 years. Susanna Soberg comes along, and she's at University of Copenhagen, and now you can get a doctoral dissertation just in brown fat, something they think didn't even exist in adults, just 15 years ago. So she says, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take these winter swimmers. So these are, the Danish Vikings, and they jump in the fjord, and it's like 4 degrees Celsius or something. And then they go to the University of Copenhagen and volunteer for this study, say, sure, scan me. She finds brown fat. And sure enough, if she gets them cold, that brown fat will be active. She said, that's fascinating. How often, how long, what temperature? She has a survey. She aggregates all of her survey results. 11 minutes a week is the average. So, Sean, what does this mean? Nothing. And I'm exaggerating a little bit. These people are doing full body immersion. Many of them will dive underwater. They'll do they're not doing a cold shower. They're all the way in the fjord up to their necks, and they do it regularly. An average is not a minimum effective dose. It's not even a recommendation. It just says that sort of when you're doing 11 minutes a week of extreme whole body cold water immersion, you're probably going to get brown fat, because that's what we found in these people.
Fascinating. I'm so glad that you broke that down. Uh, because I think everybody, I know all of my listeners, we're all interested in the minimum effective dose. We want to know, okay, what's the littlest I can do to get the greatest effect? And so now to hear the background and the explanation for why that average comes about is really fascinating. Um, I would love for you to tell, for my listeners, in case they haven't heard it yet, uh y- your experience, your sort of genesis story for how you came into cold exposure as a powerful therapy, deliberate cold exposure.
Yeah, it was pretty terrible, my Genesis story. I was separated from my wife. I was going through a divorce. I had lost a lot of weight. I used to be 250 pounds. I got myself all the way down to about 190 because, I got to go out on like the dating market again. I was 51 years old or something. And part of my um, trying to get my life together was reading every sort of self-help book that I could find. I was like, where did I go wrong? What do I need to improve? I don't want to repeat the same mistakes that I made in my marriage. So I'm reading everything. And one of these books is like, oh, you got to take cold showers to toughen up. So I'm like, all right, I want to be tough. I'm going to take cold showers. I hated every minute of every cold shower I have ever taken. And it turns out there's a good reason. There's this study out of Finland, and it compares partial cold water immersion with whole body, and they're not the same effect. Metabolically, they both activate your sympathetic nervous system, and the sympathetic nervous system will activate the brown fat. So metabolically, they're doing good things for you. And psychologically, they're going to be challenging. But you don't get the mammalian dive reflex in the shower. When you go into the ice bath, or, into the sound or the ocean or whatever the heck it is, your dive reflex will reduce your heart rate, reduce your breath rate. It will put your brain in an involuntary state of meditative sort of calm. And I love that. So I'm doing the cold showers because I think it's going to toughen me up. I go to the lab and I get my, male health panel, LDL cholesterol and whatever, HbA1c. And I'm like, I really got to get myself in good shape. And dang it, Sean, what came back was prostate specific antigen 7.0. Now, the PSA for a 52-year-old man is supposed to be below 4. If it comes back in 7, they highlight it in red and they say it's too high. You got to go see a urologist. And I'm not going to go see a doctor. I'm going to Google, right? I'm going to go look at what does the PSA thing, is that serious? And after 30 minutes, searching on the internet, I was convinced I was going to die of prostate cancer, because sometimes that's the way the internet works. You get all these catastrophic thoughts. All it really means is you have an inflamed prostate. And what you're supposed to do is have a prostate exam to confirm the inflammation. But then I know what's going to happen. After the prostate exam, they say, well, we should do a biopsy just in case. And they're going to take 16 samples out of my prostate and they're going to test those for cancer. And the false positive rate is about 1 in 3, maybe 1 in 4. So of those 16 samples, let's just say, from randomness, 5 of them come back positive. Then they're going to say, well, we need to investigate a little further. And I started talking to other men, and they said that biopsy hurts like hell. And by the way, it can go bad. There's this guy I know, and he had a sepsis infection as a result of his biopsy, had to be in the hospital. And I'm thinking, this sounds worse than cancer. So instead of going to see the urologist, instead of doing anything that the internet was telling me I was supposed to do, Sean, I was like, I would rather die of prostate cancer, which is a long, slow, miserable death, right, than wind up with a prostatectomy and have a lifetime of impotence. I just couldn't get my head around, like, what woman is ever going to love me if I suffer from erectile dysfunction forever? And so I got into the cold because I was scared, not because, I was looking for the optimal benefits and, I wasn't trying to recover from any exercise, Sean. I know it's not true, but some part of my imagination was like, you do this, you're going to die. So every day. That's what got me really serious about the ice baths. And of course, I had to go back to the lab, get it all measured again. Sean, my prostate specific antigen came down below 2. So now I'm in the normal range, right? And I'm like, okay, I'm keeping this up. The thing about doing cold exposure,
Can I
because
can
you're
I
afraid of cancer, go ahead.
how long did you do it before you got those results back?
That was about 5, 6 months
That's
before I
it.
had the guts to test again.
Okay.
Because remember, like, if I go back to the lab and this is going in the wrong direction, like, I didn't even want to know. I didn't go back to the lab until I had some confidence that I felt good, like metabolically and energetically. I'm like, look, I'm feeling good. And then I was scared of not knowing more than I was scared of knowing, because I was kind of being a wimp about it, Sean. I didn't want any bad news. So I'm going to stay in denial for 5 months, but the PSA is resolved. And you can imagine, I'm like, I'm doubling down. Like, this is working for me. I'm doing some ketogenic diet. I'm doing ice baths every day. But the thing about that is, you get out of the ice bath and you're cold. So I was doing exercises to warm up, and that could be hot yoga or it could be walking to class, because I was like a mile away from my classroom at ASU at the time. But I would do some push-ups. I got the steel mace and I started, doing like my steel mace flow, just a little bit of exercise. And when I tested, maybe it was 6 or 7 months later, it was August of 2018. And I did the whole male, panel again. and all the markers are going in the right direction. My testosterone came back 1180 nanograms per deciliter. And guess what was in red? Too high, out of range. Now it's my T. And I'm like, well, how the heck did that happen? I got to go to the library and I got to do more reading. 1991 study in Japan. It's Sakamoto et al. And he took like 24 young Japanese men and he said, we're going to put them on the exercise bike and then we're going to get them cold. Testosterone went down, luteinizing hormone went down. And this is not uncommon. Intense exercise, even though 20 minutes on the exercise bike maybe isn't all that intense, but it depends on how you do it. Intense exercise will reduce your testosterone under ordinary circumstances, elevates your cortisol, reduces your testosterone, right? And the ice bath alone, without any exercise, will reduce a man's testosterone. But then for some reason, Sakamoto reversed it. They said, instead of doing the cold after the exercise, we're going to do the cold before the exercise. Testosterone went up, luteinizing hormone went up. I don't know why. I'm not sure anybody knows why for sure, because testosterone is a combination of physiological and psychological. You could play video games, and when you like level up, you're not really doing anything but then you do something great and your testosterone goes up just because you feel like you've accomplished something. Testosterone motivates you to compete. And when you compete well, it's had this great feedback loop. It gives you more testosterone. So that's the psychological. But there's also a physiological component. Testosterone in men is mostly made in the testicles. The adrenal glands and the fat cells might have some secondary role. In women, the skin, the fat cells, the adrenal glands probably make 75% of her testosterone because their overall testosterone is so low, the ovaries make up the rest. But in men, it's the testicles that are really doing the hard work. And we know that the testicles have to stay colder than the rest of the body. So there's likely some physiological mechanisms and some psychological mechanisms. I didn't know why. I just wrote this article about it. Nobody read the article, Sean. It's like at this time, it's 2018, 2019. Who the heck is, Google doesn't give a crap about morozcoforge.com. And so maybe it's 1,000 people or something find this article until December 2022. I'm going to Iceland with my girlfriend. We're going to go see the Northern Lights. Like, who goes to Iceland, on the darkest days of the year? A cold guy, right? I get off the plane and my phone blows up and people are like, hey, Tom, you're on the Joe Rogan podcast. And we're going, no, I think I would know if I, right? And they're going, no, no, no. He showed your picture and he read out your Instagram post about your testosterone. And I'm like, wow, David Goggins was there. And it was right after Liver King was found out as if you needed any kind of more evidence than just looking at Liver King, right? And so testosterone was kind of in the news. And Joe's like, he's a Morosco customer. So he'd read the article and he goes, hey, there's this guy and he did this thing. And now I get emails, messages, direct messages from all over the world, people telling me that they've tried the protocol that they read about because Joe Rogan did something, or they saw it on Joe Rogan, and their testosterone has gone way up. So now I got 6 case studies. We're putting together the article, and these are all documented. This isn't just hearsay and people saying, hey, this is working for me, but 6 case studies that all say, this is my labs before. This is what I changed. This is my labs after. And one woman has like a 10x boost in testosterone. 2 guys I've got have more than tripled their testosterone because they were way low, like 200s, 300. And now one guy went up to 1,500 because he was combining TRT with ice baths and exercise. And I'm like, are you going to get off the TRT? He goes, no, I don't think so. I'm never going back to that feeling again. I got to pardon you for a second.
Yeah,
I
sure.
got an email. They're testing the fire alarm. So we got to ignore that crap. And it kind of messes with the podcast a little bit, but they'll probably play it again. Okay. Pardon me.
No problem. No problem. A couple of things that I want to highlight and kind of go back to. One is that's the first time that I've heard that cold exposure on its own lowers testosterone.
It does. There are people, on Twitter, and they'll say, Seager is so wrong. He should take this post down. There's no double blind, clinically controlled placebo study, whatever, 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 that says what actually happened to him happened to him. I've got a journal article right here, and it says if you get in the cold, your testosterone goes down. Well, they're right, but it's a real pain in the. I mean, they got a lousy attitude about it because I'm not saying the ice bath will raise your testosterone. I'm saying in men, ice bath and then exercise. And there's only one study that has ever done that explicit protocol. So don't come at me with 9 studies that didn't do what I'm doing,
Right.
telling me that I'm wrong. But that's the way, the internet works sometimes.
Yeah, totally. Well, let's maybe, if you would, unpack the specific protocol.
For me, it's very cold and very short. So I'm at 34 degrees. Sean, I just got out this morning. You can see my Morosco's on my balcony and sort of over my shoulder, and there's huge chunks of ice. My stepdaughter doesn't even want to get in it. She's like, can't we turn this thing up to 38? And I'm like, no. If I'm going to do a video, I got to have ice for Instagram. Otherwise, people are going to think I'm making it up. So I go very cold, but I don't stay in there too long unless, I shot a video today on weight loss and it took me like 6 minutes. And that's probably as long as I go. Ordinarily, 2 to 4 minutes, and that's it. And then I get out. I will do some steel mace. Today, I did lunges. I do a few squats, maybe some curls. I'll do some pull ups when we're done with this podcast, but it's not a lot of exercise, Sean. It's about 2 minutes of exercise for every 1 minute that I'm in the cold.
That's
And
it.
that's it. And there's a guy from Massachusetts. He's a reader, and he sent me his labs. He's 66 years old, and he got his T levels up higher than mine. He doesn't do any weights. He doesn't go to the gym. He said, I read your article. I go down to the pond, I jump in the pond, and then I kind of like power walk home. That's all he does. Just in the Sakamoto study, 20 minutes on the exercise bike, stationary bike. That was it. It's
Wow.
not a lot of exercise. I think it is something psychological about not dying. Like you get in there and it's so cold and you've activated your sympathetic nervous system, that fight or flight response has taken over. Dive reflex, parasympathetic, then strengthened. And when you come out, I mean, I feel like Superman. I've got all that dopamine. I've got all that noradrenaline, coursing through my veins now. And there's something, I want to do something with it. And for me, steel mace is ideal. But I think there's something psychological about the victory of coming out of that experience that would scare the crap out of me. So, and then there's probably something physiological about all the hormones and the adrenaline and the rewarming that happens when I'm getting my limbs moving again.
Sure. Oh my gosh. That's incredible. 2, 3 minutes in very, very cold water, followed by 6 to 9 minutes of not even, maybe not even like full exertion, but just relatively high intensity is all it takes. Wow. Every day, 7 days a week.
I do it 7 days a week.
I
I
mean,
live in Phoenix. Sometimes it's really hot here, in case you didn't know. Sometimes I'll do a couple ice baths a day, just because it takes the edge off the heat. But the protocol that we're talking about is dawn every day. I get a little bit, that Huberman light in my eyes, and I do my cold, I do my exercises. It doesn't take very long. And here's the caveat, Sean. I just got back from OptiSpan in Seattle, and
right.
they put me through this like day long, battery of tests. I got the DEXA scan, I got the in-body scan, I had an ultrasound looking at all my internal organs, and then I had to do a series of tests. So like the wall sit, the grip strength, the broad jump, how many push-ups. Now, for a 58-year-old fat guy, I'm not doing too bad. I knocked out 33 push-ups. It's not like the worst in the world, but it's also not like Ben Greenfield territory or something. And then comes the VO2 max test. They put that mask on me that you have to breathe through. They put me on the treadmill, 3.5 miles an hour, slight incline. I'm like, this isn't too bad. Sean, 8 minutes later, I'm ready to throw up in the mask. Like my cardio is for crap. And I had to stop the test before I got really gross. And they said 28. Now, throughout every other test, like the guy who's examining me, he's really encouraging me. He's like, oh, that's 113 on your grip strength. And that's not bad. You're doing okay. We try for, what do you say, 1 to 2 minutes on the hanging, how long can you hang on test? And I got, 2 minutes and 1 second or something like that. He says, oh, you're doing great. I came back with 28 and he goes, okay. Because we were both demoralized. I sent that to my girlfriend. She says, 28 is poor and your life expectancy is less than 10 years. And I'm like, what am I doing, Sean? My life expectancy is way better than 10 years. But, she pointed it out. She's like, I guess it makes sense since you don't really do any cardio.
Sure.
The ice bath is keeping me strong and it's keeping my metabolism in great shape. But it's no substitute for cardio. It's not like running or, I don't know. I used to do cardio ballet, or it's not like going to the gym and doing your CrossFit or whatever the heck you do. And so, in some respects, I'm in good shape and I'm strong. But the ice bath is doing nothing for me cardiovascularly.
Mm, fascinating. To get even more granular, how do you specifically breathe during the cold exposure?
I use box breathing.
Okay.
And, there's a lot of different ways to structure your breathing. I read James Nestor's book. I thought that was really clever. I'm like, oh, I should be in on 3 and out on 5. No, wait a minute, in on 4, out on, no, is it in on 6? And I can't even remember a dang thing when I'm in that. How am I supposed to breathe? And so I go, shoot, Tom, it doesn't matter. Just make it up. Just
Yeah.
in, out, pick a number, any number. As long as your breathing becomes structured, you will calm your sympathetic nervous system down and strengthen your parasympathetic response. Because as soon as you go in there, you start to, you almost feel the urge to hyperventilate. Don't do that. Hyperventilation anywhere near the water is a bad idea. So you take control of your breath. I use box breathing. Also, don't hold your breath. I think even when I dunk my head, I do a slow exhale out because breathing is the gateway to control of those involuntary, those parasympathetic things. You think you can't control your heart rate. You think you can't control your brown fat. Well, Wim Hof says he can. And the measurements back him up on that. What we think is involuntary maybe is a little bit closer to our own, like our brain has more influence than we think when we learn to make those involuntary systems conscious. And breathing is that gateway between consciousness and unconsciousness. So structure that.
Yeah, when I do cold exposure, I slow my breathing down and I just try to I count in and count out and I set my timer. So it's like I usually go 3 or 4 minutes. And so if I just focus on 4 seconds in and same thing, 4 seconds out. I don't do the holds necessarily, but the time goes by faster. If I'm counting the seconds of my breath, I lose track and then the timer goes off and it's like, oh, that wasn't that bad. That was it was like 60 breaths or something that I just did really slowly. That's how I trick myself into it.
I think it's great because it also gives your brain something to do.
Which is important, right? Which is,
Yep.
like if you get all, start thinking about, some little bit of numbness in your toes and start freaking about that, or if you start stressing about what you have that day, it makes it miserable.
Yep.
It does. I've seen a couple of references in some of the interviews that you've done around the cold exposure and the benefits, and I was a little surprised. So we've got testosterone. I think stress management, stress reduction is kind of intuitive. I think people would make sense about that. Metabolism and brown fat, obviously that makes sense. The one thing that did jump out to me was memory, and that recently came up in one of your conversations. What can you
Yeah.
tell us about cold exposure and memory?
There are two aspects to this. Chris Palmer, he's a psychiatrist. He's got a medical degree, psychiatrist at Harvard University. He wrote a pretty good book called Brain Energy. We all know that the brain is the most metabolically demanding organ in the body, right? It's going to use like 25% of all the energy used in your body is going to be used in your brain. What Chris Palmer points out is that if the mitochondria or the metabolism of the brain isn't right, then your brain's not right. And that is both cognitively and emotionally. So people can suffer from what we call mental health disorders because their metabolism in their brain, but really throughout their body, has been undermined by damage to their mitochondria. Insulin sensitivity. If you become insulin resistant, it is probably impacting your brain and impacting your mental health. So this is a great book. The first way that the ice baths will help your brain function is by improving your metabolism. You become more insulin sensitive. The ice bath stimulates mitobiogenesis, so your mitochondria get in better shape, and this is going to help your cognitive function. And all of that was pretty well accepted. And I thought maybe, that's all we needed to know until I got a direct message from an opera singer in Massachusetts. This is Big Brev, on Instagram. And he's got this incredible range. Like you can go way down low, but then he can also, and he's incredible. He's a professional opera singer. And he said, I've been doing ice baths, and I find that if I do one right after my rehearsal, I retain what I was trying to rehearse better. So I'm like, well, what are you trying to memorize? And he goes, oh, everything. I'm singing in a foreign language. I don't even know what the words. I have to the lyrics, the music, the blocking. Like he's got to act while he's singing, and all of this requires extensive rehearsal. He cuts his rehearsal time by doing the ice bath. So I got to go to the library again. As human beings, we are wired for emotional, I call it saliency, but I'm going to reword it. We will remember the most emotionally impactful things about our lives. Those are the memories that stand out because our brain turns on when our emotions are elevated. I can tell you, Sean, earliest memory of my life, and I know it because I was 3 years old. It was the day my little sister was born. Now, this is kind of a big, like, I didn't know, but I know her birthday. I know, and we're the same month, 3 years apart. And I can remember looking up at the hospital window, and my mother is in the window, and she's like, I guess we weren't allowed to go see the room. We could just, like, this is the 60s. That's the way it worked. The most emotionally impactful experiences are the ones that we remember the best because that's when our sympathetic nervous system is activated. And that's the moment that your body says, this is a danger that we need to remember. Or maybe this is an opportunity that we need to recall. This is one of those moments that is critical to our survival. And so it primes your brain for that memory. Big Brev, he comes out of his rehearsal. He gets himself into the ice bath. What does that do? Activate his sympathetic nervous system, create in him the fight or flight response, prime his brain for memory. And so I had to look up these journal articles and say, what is going on here? Boom. People have done these studies that say if you have that experience like 20 minutes after whatever you're studying or whatever you're trying to memorize, it will be encoded faster and better in your long-term memory. Now, there's a caveat. Don't ask Big Brev to do like long division when he's in the ice bath. Your brain is really busy when you're in there. And it's trying to take these recent experiences and transfer them from the short term to the long term memory. This is not a good time to be doing a crossword puzzle or something. And so it's kind of paradoxical how the ice bath can improve one type of memory, even as you feel like you're cognitively impaired while you're in there.
That's incredible. That is so mind-blowing, and it makes tons of sense to me that, whoa, something is happening, something's big. I'm either in in the case with a cold, like I'm in danger. So I'm activating the parts of my brain. I'm paying closer attention. I'm I'm responding to external stimuli. And I've also been training, rehearsals in this way, and it just sort of like locks it in and keeps it more salient, more present, more accessible potentially for later. I just think that that is absolutely incredible.
It is
Wow.
stunning. Yeah. And I had to go a little further. I talked to Joe DeTore. He's at the University of South Florida in Tampa. Joe spent, 20 something years as a Navy diver. So he's, really interested in hyperbarics and pressure because you need all that knowledge. And he's got so much experience as a diver. He gets out of the Navy. And what's he do? He says, okay, I'm going to do a doctorate. I'm going to do it in hyperbarics. And he does. Now he's teaching at University of South Florida. He's got his favorite truck that, I guess it's like a 1943 pickup truck because 1,943 feet was as deep as he ever dove in one of those little mini submarines. And he's living a good life until somebody T-bones him. Now, if you're in a 1943 pickup truck, you got no airbags. You got no like safety equipment, traumatic brain injury. He's in the hospital. The attending physician was one of the people who took his class. And Joe didn't remember any of this. Joe realized he had a traumatic brain injury. He didn't need the diagnosis. And he's like, how am I going to heal my brain? He's using hyperbaric, red light, and ice baths. So it's this third level that goes even deeper. There's metabolism, there's the activation of the sympathetic nervous system that can accelerate the transfer of memory from short to long term. But for those who are suffering traumatic brain injury, it can also be protective of the brain. The brown fat in your body takes about 10 days to 2 weeks to recruit new brown fat if you're doing your cold every day. The brown fat will produce neuroprotective factors like FGF21. It's associated with elevated levels of brain-derived neuroprotective factors. So what is that? BDNPF. And these will help heal brain injury or protect the brain against injury. So this relationship between the cold and the brain is multi-leveled and profound. I wish that I could have gotten my mother, before she died of Alzheimer's, into the cold on a more regular basis. Before she became completely like, she couldn't do anything. One of the things that really helped her, this is going back like 10 years, was she took this swim aerobics class. They would get into the pool and they would just do some basic, because my mom's old, and it would be social and it would be fun. I'm like, exercise is really good for you. I think there was more to it than that, Sean. Like
Yeah.
if you reconstructed now, I would have rather that pool be cold. She would have hated it. All the old ladies would have been like, I'm not doing it anymore. But it would have probably helped their brain.
Wow. Incredible. Wow.
Pardon me again. Do you need to interrupt? Like, a little bit, but I can reframe. Hang on a second, Sean. I got
No
somebody
problem.
to introduce you to.
Oh, okay.
Right. So this is my stepdaughter, Paige.
Hey,
She's
Paige.
19. And remember, I said she wasn't going to get in the ice bath because it is
She's
too
gonna
much ice.
she's gonna go.
Now she's like, I want to go, but I don't want to be on camera doing it. So I'm just gonna like reframe our shot while
Sure.
she does the ice bath.
No problem.
All right. The cat's not going in the ice bath either.
We get a better shot of that beautiful art back there too.
This was done by my graduate students. Um, this one is a master's student. He never really pursued his engineering degree. He decided art was what he wanted to do. And he was just doing his art in school to kind of cope with his structural engineering classes.
Uh-huh.
And then next to it is a doctoral student. She does this, Dr. Seuss kind of very abstract cartoon. And I thought it was so great. They graduated, they gave me this stuff, and I'm like, I'm putting it on the wall. I
Awesome.
didn't tell them. I just started doing these podcasts and I didn't say, hey. And then I got a message from one of the master's student, and he's like, I recognize your baby.
Didn't know it was gonna go out to millions and millions and millions of people.
Right.
What other lessons besides the benefits, the medical benefits, the memory, what other lessons has the cold taught you?
It I can do hard things. I mean, that's the lesson. And the thing is, I need that lesson. It seems like every day. Like, maybe it's the life of an entrepreneur, where barely hanging on at Morosco Forge. This has become a very difficult business. There are now 100 different, Chinese cold plunge knockoffs, and you can go online. They all have the same name, like Polar Monkey Pod Plunge, or something like that. And there are lots of cheaper brands than Morosco. So we're growing a little bit, but we have so many challenges that it makes me anxious. And sometimes, before the sun comes up can be really rough. I get in the ice bath and I come out and I'm like, no, 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 Tom, there's like three things you need to do that you haven't tried yet. Try those things.
Hmm.
It's like, it's kind of like hang in there. You remember Joe Rogan did his comedy special? He had this live comedy special and he wanted to do it live. Well, one of his best jokes in there was, if you'd asked me 3 years ago, he says, I would have told you vaccines were like the greatest invention that medicine has ever. But now I don't think we went to the moon,
Yeah.
And so he's practicing this. Part of his preparation is his ice bath every
Yeah.
day. He talked about it. He's in his Morosco and he's got ice everywhere. And he says, I probably talk about my cold plunge too much. People are probably sick of it, but I got this big comedy special coming up, and this is how I prepare. I
Yeah.
feel the same way. I do hard things. I challenge myself. There's no giving up. There's no quitting. There's no surrender. And then I look down at all that ice and I'm like, could skip a day.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Who's going to know? Right? It's so tempting. I don't give in. I get into that ice and I say, Tom, just do 15 seconds. That'll be fine. That's all you have to do today. And then I do it. And then, 15 seconds go by and I'm like, oh, that's not so bad. I could do 30 seconds. And then 30 seconds go by. I'm like, what was I even worried about?
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, a lot of my life is like that. I can
Hmm.
do a little bit. I could do a little bit more. And then I make an accomplishment. I'm like, what was I even worried about?
Yeah. Yeah. That I think is a really important point. Is, whether you're an entrepreneur or you're stressed about bills, or you're just living in the modern day. It's easy to let your thoughts get away from you, and we need to seek out ways to get out of that sort of hamster wheel brain, looping, obsessing, stressing. We know that stress leads to disease and dysfunction, and there are a number of different biohacks, processes that we can do that just give us a little reprieve from that. Obviously, meditation, obviously, like yoga, jujitsu. You can't focus on, going out on a stand-up paddleboard. There's a list of things that you can do that just get you out of your mind for a minute, that really give you an opportunity to get a little bit of respite from living in the modern world. And I I think that the importance of doing that and combining it with something that's physiologically beneficial, like deliberate cold exposure, just it's this idea of stacking these activities that have 10, 20, 60 different benefits, and it doesn't take that long. I mean, we've talked about it already, how quickly you can drastically affect your sense of self, your well-being, your body, your brain. So, yeah, again, at the heart of biohacking, it's what minimum effective dose. What's the least amount that I can do that's going to have the greatest amount of benefit? So we've covered memory, testosterone and hormones, stress, metabolism. I'll throw immune system in there. Are there other benefits that maybe our listeners would be surprised about?
We should talk about the immune system. Um, Vitamin D has a relationship with the immune system that is way underappreciated. And I didn't know this until after my son, he was 6 years old, and he was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disorder. So, this is his own immune system attacking the cells in his pancreas that make insulin. And it's so frustrating because it's not even like it's his own body that is destroying its capacity to stay healthy. Where does that happen? I didn't know. Now, as long as he injects insulin into his body, he's going to be fine. He can achieve good glucose control. There's no reason to expect a diminished life expectancy for him now because we've got such great technologies. But it was about 2 years after his diagnosis, a longitudinal study came out of Finland. They were watching people for 20 years and they were monitoring those women who were taking vitamin D during the last trimester of their pregnancy or during the first year of the baby's life, and those women who weren't. It turns out that vitamin D insufficiency is associated with increased rates of type 1 diabetes later in life. So, vitamin D has a relationship with immune function that is way underappreciated. And I start going into this: rheumatoid arthritis, Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis, all have origins in vitamin D irregularities. And you might be normal now, but have, because the immune system is still developing in the first year of life, have some aberration in your immune system that was due to a vitamin D deficiency you experienced as an infant that can have long lasting consequences for the immune system. And you got to be like, well, Sean, how is this possible that people who live at northern latitudes, Finland is one, where the rates of type 1 diabetes were very high until they started doing vitamin D supplementation and UV light therapy during the winter. And that brought those rates down. If autoimmune disorders are associated with vitamin D insufficiency or deficiency early in life, how could people exist at these remote latitudes where there's no sunshine? And the answer is even more speculative. Cold protects the body against the adverse effects of vitamin D insufficiency. When you think about how the vitamin D comes from the sun, and there isn't going to be any sun in Finland in the wintertime, but there's going to be plenty of cold. And if you get some of that cold, it will protect the body against the insufficiency of vitamin D. The mechanism is quite mysterious, but you don't have to listen to Jack Cruz for too long. He will tell you that when you get in the cold, that you will produce your own UV light. Now, I have not, I'm like, where in the library does it say that? But it's a plausible explanation for why the cold exposure would protect you against vitamin D insufficiency. And vitamin D is way oversimplified. There are like 25 different forms of vitamin D in your body at every, given time. But I start from the assumption that Jack Cruz is always right, and I just don't understand a word that comes out of the man's mouth. And then I have to do all my homework and I have to figure out what is he saying. So if he says that cold will protect you by causing your body to make its own UV light inside your body, I'm like, that's got to be right, and it's up to me to figure it out.
Yeah, listen to Uncle Jack, he'll tell you.
Right. Well, if he were correct, then it would make sense that we would see improvements in rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's disease, and type 1 diabetes. That cold would improve the management of these symptoms in the body. And guess what? It does. Cold exposure is more effective than all 17 FDA approved drugs for multiple sclerosis. There's no cure for type 1 diabetes. There's no cure for multiple sclerosis. But cold exposure will reduce the frequency of MS flare ups, and it will help the person gain control of the muscles that they might otherwise not be able to control, improve their proprioception, improve their endurance, and they report a better quality of life after they start cold exposure. It is the same with Parkinson's. It is the same with rheumatoid arthritis. It reduces the inflammation, improves the freedom of movement. And some of these mechanisms, like reduced inflammation, they're straightforward and we get it. But the cold is acting on the immune system in a way that modulates this aberrant immune function that is the origin of the disease. You'd think that I could, write a proposal to the National Institute of Health and get a ton of money to study this. But the colleagues I have who are really good at NIH funding, they're like, yeah, no, they're never going to fund that.
Ah,
You're going to have to do that research in another way. That's just not what the NIH is about right now. And they're
right.
right.
Yeah. Is the cold is cold exposure, is there an archetype or somebody, is there, are there a group of people that should not do cold exposure?
Yeah. And I'm a little irritated about this one. If you go on Wikipedia, it will cite some of Professor Mike Tipton's hypotheses about autonomic conflict and heart arrhythmia as if that was the big concern. It's not. The big concern is hypertension. If you have high blood pressure and you go into the cold, vasoconstriction is going to restrict the blood flow. It's going to squeeze all that blood out of your limbs and it's going to pack it into your core and probably your brain because, that's out of the water. It's going to raise your blood pressure. Now, if you already have high blood pressure, you could wind up with an acute hypertensive event. This has
Mm.
been reported to me 2 times by medical professionals who are supervising the people and saying, yeah, I had a patient or I had a subject who went through an acute hypertensive event, brought him back, no long lasting consequences, but not a good thing. Hypertension is the number one contraindication. And the way to get around that, because it can also be a hormetic stressor that helps your circulatory system, that builds the endothelial cells that are responsible for vasodilation. You can bring your hypertension condition under control with cold as long as you don't kill yourself first. Start warmer, start with partial body, just do the legs, work your way up to the more acute whole body cold water immersion. There are a couple of others. We were talking about the brain. The relationship between the cold and the brain is profound. And in about 1 in 20,000 cases, especially among the elderly, and by elderly, I'm 58 years old, Sean. I don't think of myself as elderly. Um, but people in their 60s have experienced this. It's called transient global amnesia. They get into the ice bath, they can't remember anything. They can't remember who they are. Their brain is working on something. It is very frightening. And those people will likely never get in the ice bath again. It's transient. Of all these cases, no one has ever experienced like a permanent memory loss. But the idea that you spend, 15 minutes not remembering whatever it is, who's president or what your name is or what the names of your kids are, extremely scary. So I think we should consider that another contraindication. People ask me about pregnancy and fertility, and cold water bath is great for pregnancy. It will, I mean, inflammation is a big problem, especially late in the pregnancy, and the ankles get swollen, and women have trouble sleeping. They are in a physiological state of insulin resistance. And if that goes too far, then it can become pathological, gestational diabetes. The cold helps take that inflammation out of the limbs, out of the ankles, make it more comfortable to walk. Women have reported to me much better sleep, and it stimulates the metabolism in a way that will prevent the physiological insulin resistance that is normal during pregnancy from going too far into pathological insulin resistance, which could be preeclampsia, eclampsia, gestational diabetes. So pregnancy, surprisingly enough, is not one of the contraindications to ice bath.
Hmm. I appreciate that explanation. I don't want to let you go before we talk about green light. Tell
Let's talk
because
about green light.
I've got, and this is going to be maybe too much information, but I've got red light going on my testicles right now. Oh, one of my lights is out. Uh, I understand blue light exposure and have, my glasses somewhere around here for, the raw optics. But when I started to see some of your posts about green light, I was like, oh geez, here's another color of light that I that I need to learn and understand as the biohacker guy. What the heck is green light for?
Do you suffer from headaches?
I don't.
Then you're probably not going to go to my website and buy, a $400 pair of green light goggles. But if you did suffer from headaches, in particular migraine headaches, those $400 goggles would feel like a bargain because green light interrupts the pain of headaches. And it was first discovered for use in treating migraines. But since then, we've discovered sinus headaches, post concussion headaches, cluster headaches, stress headaches. Everything except a high estrogen headache responds well to green light. So this came out of Harvard in, 2016. It's not that long ago. There's a guy there named Rami Bernstein. I've never met him, but he noticed that migraineurs experience what's called photosensitivity. And you might say, well, blue, red, green, why don't we just mix them all together? I'll do white light therapy. I'm getting all the benefits, and but for migraine headaches, it doesn't work that way because Burstein tested every wavelength of light on people in an active migraine, and every wavelength made it worse except green. So you
Mm.
had to shut down all of the other wavelengths, and they're looking only at green, and it reduced their pain. Well, that's pretty fascinating. University of Arizona, they crank up it's not a replicate study, but they're extending it. They say, well, if that's the case, we ought to be able to put green light in people's homes. And we're going to see if they just do a little green light an hour a day, does that reduce the incidence or the severity of migraines? Sean, it does. And
Wow.
so they got these subjects, down in Tucson, gave them the green lights, locked them in a closet for an hour because you got to block out everything, right? And I go, this is amazing. My girlfriend, she gets migraines all the time. Called up, Mito Red Light. They're right in Scottsdale. And I said to Scott Chiveri, could you build me a light? But instead of putting green in, instead of putting red in, just putting green LEDs. And I'll tell you the wavelength. He says, I don't see why not. So he sends one over. Now, in the red light, it's always like we have the most powerful and we have the greatest density of LED. They compete on power. And so this thing came over, and my God, Sean, it was like blinding. And Scott called me up. He goes, "This garbage. It'll never work." And then I said, "Well, I got to see it for myself, though, don't you think?" He goes, "I'm telling you right now, it's too bright." So me and my girlfriend, we go over there. And she's got kind of a background headache because for a light guy, Scott's offices are terrible. He's got fluorescent lights and stuff. And she's sitting on the couch. She's going, I'm at a 6 already. Well, I turn on the green light and I'm like, oh, Scott, you're right. This is terrible. It'll never work. She says, let me see that thing. And she takes it and she puts it right in front of her eyes with her eyes closed.
Mm.
When your eyes are closed, you block out all the other wavelengths of light. And this thing was so bright that it would shine the green right through her closed eyelids. And she goes, this feels really good. I think it's taken me down to a 2. And it was almost instantaneous.
Wow.
So I'm like, Scott, I think we just invented, the world's most powerful green phototherapy device. And so we put it up on the website. I sent some to a friend who's a chiropractor in Utah. He started using it with some of his patients who have it. The clinical reports that we're getting on this green light are astounding. If you go to mygreenlamp.com, you're going to read some of these reviews and you're going to say, they're all fake because people pay for reviews and oh, it's a miraculous, oh, I can't believe how you're going to say this is all crap, you can't trust any of it. Every single one of those reviews is from a real person who had a real condition, who put that review up there without me even asking them to do it. Because if you're riding like a migraine of a 9, and sometimes these are like 2-3 day episodes, and you can take that down to a 2 without medication, you're going, this must be a miracle. So one of the most profound examples is Andrew Z. I'm not sure if you follow the Mark Bell, Mark
Oh, yeah.
Smelly Belly on, right?
Yeah, of
He's
course.
got a great sense of humor. He's wicked smart. He injects himself with, steroids they wouldn't even give a horse. And then he tells you, this is what happened to my body. And I think Mark Bell is terrific. I go on his podcast because I guess he wanted to talk to more scientists and stuff. And his podcast producer is Andrew Z. Andrew's been getting headaches since he was like 9 years old. And he goes, so I read about your green light. Does that really work? I send him one. He and his wife are using it. He goes, this is the most amazing thing. I'm staying at work now. I don't have to call in. I can like manage my affairs because a 2 or a 3 headache, no big deal. It might slow me down a little bit. A 9 and I'm out of commission. So I've got firefighters, moms, people who have tried everything, Botox injections, Excedrin migraine, whatever, and nothing will do more than take the edge off. And then they try green and they're like, how is my headache gone? So this green light is real, but I also have 3 reports from women who they're not menopausal. I don't know if they're even perimenopausal, but they're maybe in their late 30s, early 40s, and they're going through some hormonal changes. And there's a point in their cycle where estrogen goes high and they often get a headache. And I've said, oh, you should try this miraculous green light. It doesn't do a damn thing for them.
Huh.
So it's the one type of headache that I can't help.
Sounds like there's some more research to be done.
There sure is. Nobody, like Burstein doesn't know how this works. The University of Arizona, they don't know what the mechanisms are. All I have is speculation. There are 2 wavelengths of light that dominate the shady forest: green and near infrared. And the near infrared is invisible, so you wouldn't think of that one, right? But you're like, oh, shady forest, that makes sense. All the leaves are green. Sean, I think there is something about
Mm.
the green forest that probably goes way back, in our ancestral existence, that calms down the nervous system, that is probably good for the brain. Because U of A did one other study. They said, forget about headaches. We're going to take the therapist's office and we're going to have a controlled study. These therapists are going to be lit with green, and that's it. Just narrow band LED green light. And the people are going to come in and they're going to do standard talk therapy for anxiety in the green light. And the other one is going to be your standard, office fluorescent lighting setting. They got a significant reduction in general anxiety disorder compared to regular therapy under regular light from that therapy, which took place in green light.
Wow.
Something about green calms us down. And it's not just the light. If you put a mural of a forest in a dentist's office, like on the wall, people report less pain. If
Sure.
you are in a hospital and you can see trees outside your window, people recover faster. There's something, I mean, it is like a back to nature kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I live in downtown Phoenix, Arizona. I can't drive an hour and a half up to Payson just to be out in the forest. Sometimes you have to bring the forest to the city. And I think that's what the green light might be doing.
Fascinating. Oh, well, I can't wait for more study, you know. Yeah, cool. God dang, this has been so fun.
Good.
This has been so informative and so fun, and obviously your enthusiasm for this type of work is it just shines through. And 2 more questions. One
Yeah.
is where can we find you? And then I have a fill in the blank. So obviously, founder of the first ever ice barrel or cold plunge device with Morozco. Where can people find you? Why is Morozco the cream of the crop? And where can people learn more about the work that you do and Morozco?
Before Morozco, there was a company called coldtub.com. They made hot tubs and they're like, oh, we'll put a chiller in there. We'll make them cold. And I don't think they realized the enormous market opportunity because they would only custom build them and they didn't have a website where you could click to buy or anything like that. And they were like $18,000 or something. You can imagine, right? And I looked at that. If there had been a tub that made ice, me and my student Jason, we never would have, founded an ice bath company. We just would have bought the freaking thing. But there wasn't. And so Morozco was the first machine that made its own ice. And for a long time, we were the only machine that made its own ice because that's a lot harder than just taking a tub and attaching a chiller like everybody else does. So now I get this question a lot because Morozco is expensive and it's not for everybody. So people might say, why should I spend more money on a Morozco? And I could talk about, well, our warranty is better and you really got to look at the terms and conditions because the other guy's got crappy customer service. It's not it. We get down to cold. We make ice. We're freezing. And maybe you listen to Gary Brecka, and Brecka says, oh, I haven't seen a lot of evidence that there are any benefits in going that cold. And then Joe Rogan will say, It sucks worse. That's why I do it. The
Yeah.
psychological benefits are down below 39 degrees.
Wow.
Once you get acclimated, you're going to be like, well, 40 is boring for me now. You really need the cold. For Fred Warner, he's on the 49ers and he's off to an amazing start of his season. I'm talking to Fred and I'm saying, what about the Morosco? He goes, I hate it. And I kind of love it. I have this like relationship where sometimes I'm just staring at it and I don't really want to get in. But Fred tells me I'm as fast as I'm ever going to be. I'm as strong as I'm ever going to be. My game now depends upon the mental aspects. And that's why he gets into the Morosco as opposed to something less expensive and warmer because he's working on his mental game. So that's one. And here's another one. Morosco is grounded, like electrically connected to the earth. You cannot get that from a Rubbermaid tub or an acrylic tub or a plastic tub or the Morosco metal tub is attached to a ground wire that
Wow.
goes straight into the wiring in your house and will connect you to earth. Brian Hoyer of Shielded Healing has measured this. He's done it twice, once for Ben Greenfield, once for Luke Story. And he said 30 times more effective for grounding your body than walking around barefoot in the grass. So some people have grounding mats and some people have grounding sheets, and those are wonderful things. But you get into the Morosco and it's practically instantaneous. It is the second best thing to nature. So the two selling points that I always emphasize are it gets colder and it's grounded. But then the customers keep coming back to me and they saying, yeah, those are good points, but I run it at 45 degrees and I don't know anything about grounding. The reason I have Morosco is you don't sell me chemicals. I'm like, what are you talking about? And I'm getting this from Mitch Wisnowski. He's the punter on the 49ers. And he says, I have no clout. If Fred talks to John Lynch and says, hey, we need something like this, if Purdy says, hey, we need something like that, but Mitch goes, I'm just the punter. Nobody listens to me. They still have seed oils in the cafeteria, for goodness sakes. He goes, I keep mine kind of warm compared to you. He's in the 40s. But he goes, I have sensitive skin. I can't take the chlorine. And the 49ers used to have these massive industrial machines that
Yeah.
were kept clean with chlorine and stabilizers and surfactants. And Mitch wouldn't get in them. Nick Bosa, he doesn't care. He's like, I'll go in anything. But Mitch is like, it doesn't work for me. So he got the Morosco because we keep it clean with ozone alone. And ozone is healthy for the skin, whereas chlorine is just bad all around. So if I had to summarize it, I would say three things besides the customer service: colder, grounded, and chlorine free.
Wow. Awesome. That's that's so cool. Okay. This is the last question, and I've asked this hundreds and hundreds of times. It's a fill in the blank, and this can be related to really anything. It doesn't have to be necessarily specific to deliberate cold exposure, and you can elaborate as much or as little as you wish. Fill in the blank. Everyone would benefit from knowing.
Oh, Sean, I'm a professor, right? I'm supposed to be the one who gives the quizzes. um, but let me see. Everyone would benefit from knowing what mitochondria do. When I was in, freshman biology or something like that, and I'm learning about DNA and there's, sexual reproduction, and you get this from your dad and you get this from your mom, nucleus and all that stuff. Nobody told me about mitochondria. Nobody said mitochondria have their own DNA. So I got to be like 50 years old before somebody explains all this. And there's reasons for it. Lynn Margulis, she was a scientist who was married to Carl Sagan in like the late 60s and the early 70s. And she got really interested in mitochondria. She said, I think mitochondria used to be a separate species. Like when you go back to, primordial soup or whatever your vision of the origin of, life is on this earth. She says mitochondria used to be their own single cell organism. And then this more complex organism comes along and like, oh, we're gonna eat that up. But instead of destroying the mitochondria was subsumed within the cell walls of the more complex organism. And it learned to perform a function inside that organism, which was converting food substrates in our body, it would be lipids or glucose, into ATP, which is a carrier of energy. So mitochondria, sometimes you hear like they're the battery, or that's not the right way to think of it. They are the energy conversion, the site of energy conversion to the useful forms that you need for wound repair or growth or exercise or thinking, or your mitochondria. Your mitochondria are life. When Lynn Margalis said, I think I understand the origins of mitochondria and their function within the human body, she was laughed at for years and said, that couldn't possibly be right. That's not the way, single cell organisms work. And now everybody's like, yeah, she was right. These mitochondria are the key to your life because life is energy flow. The key to your life is not in your DNA. Your cellular, sorry, the DNA in the nucleus of the cell is probably 1% of all the DNA required to keep your body running. The other 99, it's in your microbiome. It's in the bacteria on your skin and your gut flora, and it's in your mitochondria. They have their own DNA. And if you can take care of your mitochondrial DNA, they will take care of everything else in your body. Everyone should know what their mitochondria do. And now you say, well, what do your mitochondria need? Sean, they need a break. Like if you don't get good sleep, your mitochondria don't get a break. Uh, if you don't get good light hygiene, so like dark at night and light during the day, your mitochondria don't get a break. If you eat too many seed oils, your mitochondria don't get a break. If you eat too many if you're constantly snacking on carbohydrates and you never fast or you never go keto, your mitochondria don't get a break. They need recovery time. They need stress, just like your muscles, and then they need rest so that in those rest periods, they can do mitophagy, which is the elimination of bad mitochondria, and they can do mitobiogenesis, which is the production of new mitochondria. And in animal models, the best thing for mitophagy and mitobiogenesis is acute, deliberate, cold exposure. So once you learn what your mitochondria do and that they are the key to longevity and to health span, you kind of want to take care of them. And how do you take care of them? Exercise is good. Get the seed oils out of your diet. Get dark at night. Get good sleep and get some cold. That's what I want everybody to know.
Dr. Thomas Seager, thank you so much for joining me today on the Optimal Performance Podcast.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.